Good evening. We begin tonight for the first time in the entire Trump-Russia saga with clarity, with something that cannot be discounted, downplayed, or spun as complaints from a losing campaign or called fake news. This doesn't come from unnamed sources or deep state leaks. It's nothing that can be described as anything but what it actually is. Simple words from a string of emails between Donald Trump Jr. and a family acquaintance with something to offer, allegedly coming straight from the Russian government. From the opening email dated June 3rd of last year, quote, some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. That is from a music producer named Rob Goldstone, passing on information he says is from a Russian pop star who himself is the son of a real estate mogul known as the Donald Trump of Russia. Goldstone goes on to say in that same message, quote, this is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump. That's the offer. Dirt on Hillary Clinton gathered by a foreign adversary to help Donald Trump become president. And Trump Jr.'s reply, quote, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. And from there, Trump Jr. and Goldstone go on to set up a meeting with someone Goldstone first calls, quote, the Russian government attorney who's flying over from Moscow, then in the next email, the Russian attorney. Several more emails follow, with Trump Jr. looping in campaign manager Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner. The meeting is set for June 9th at Trump Tower. And again, this is the plain and simple language from emails released by Donald Trump Jr. himself as part of his evolving explanation of this meeting, which the New York Times first revealed on Saturday. Keeping him honest, for starters, they expose his prior accounts of the meeting as simply untrue. He wasn't, as he first said, motivated to meet this woman out of concern for Russian orphans. He certainly did, contrary to how he described it on Saturday, discuss politics. The woman, though unnamed, was not offered up simply as some random acquaintance of a friend, as he first suggested. She was described as a Russian government attorney with information from the Russian government. She did not, as some Trump surrogates have suggested on this program just last night, just get walked into Trump Tower. One of the emails discusses arrangements for notifying security she was coming. Much of what Donald Trump Jr. has said and much of how he has characterized the meeting is revealed to be untrue by his own email chain. More important, though, is what today's revelation does to the long-running, larger narrative about Donald Trump Sr., people close to him, and Russia.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
This administration disagrees with all of the stories that claim that the president and his campaign colluded with Russia in any capacity.
Of course not. Why would there be any contacts between the campaign? Chris, this is all a distraction.
Absolutely not. And I discussed that with the president-elect just last night. Those conversations never happened.
There is no connection between the president or the staff here and anyone doing anything with Russia.
I mean, this is time and time again, lie after lie. You notice he won't say, well, I say this. We hear experts. You know, his house cat at home once said that this is what's happening with the Russians. It's disgusting. It's so phony.
That was Donald Trump Jr. after he'd had that meeting. Everything you just heard either gets dented or contradicted by these emails. No contact with Russians? Not true. No politically motivated contact with Russians? Not true. No politically motivated contact with Russians who have ties to the Russian government? Not true. At least Donald Trump Jr. believed this attorney had ties to the Russian government. In fact, these emails, again, in very plain English, lay out even more. Politically motivated contact with a Russian individual with claims of ties to the Kremlin, promising information that would help achieve what is billed as the Russian goal of hurting Hillary Clinton and helping Donald Trump. It is the first such encounter that someone close to Donald Trump has acknowledged, and the president's eldest son certainly qualifies as close. So does Jared Kushner, who is yet to comment, and Paul Manafort. Now, it may turn out to be the only such encounter, or one of many. We don't know, and I think that's important to point out. We don't know if there's more to come. One thing that's clear, though, the reaction from the White House is different this time. The president has not gone on a tweet storm so far. White House spokespeople have not vented their outrage at the media, haven't hollered fake news, or even issued a formal denial at all. There's only this late today from spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders reading a statement from the president, and by the way, not doing it on camera. Cameras were not allowed to be in the room.
My son is a high-quality person, and I applaud his transparency. And beyond that, I'm going to have to refer everything on this matter to John Jr.'s counsel and outside counsel.
Well, the White House says the president did not know about the meeting last year, which happened just one floor down from his office at Trump Tower, where he happened to be at the time. And as you know, as you saw, the president denies getting help from the Russians. However, credit to the Washington Post's Philip Bump for this. There's a moment from the stump that looks maybe a little different tonight in light of Trump Jr.'s emails. A speech his father gave on June 7th of last year, 4 days after that first email promising dirt on Hillary Clinton, and 2 days before the meeting actually took place.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Now, was that a tease related to what his son was hoping to learn in this meeting? We don't know. We do know he ended up delaying that speech more than a week, and when he did finally give it, he took the usual shots at Hillary Clinton but did not add anything new. This was on the 23rd, 2 weeks after the Trump Tower meeting, at which his son says the Russian lawyer did not deliver any dirt. And Donald Trump Jr. has just spoken out, telling Fox's Sean Hannity he did not discuss the meeting with his father and talking about his thoughts going into it.
Things are going a million miles an hour again. And, hey, wait a minute. I've heard about all these things, but maybe this is something. I should hear them out. This was, again, just basic information that was going to be possibly there. I didn't know these guys well enough to understand that if this talent manager from Miss Universe, had this kind of thing. So I wanted to hear them out. In retrospect, I probably would have done things a little differently. Again, this is before the Russia mania. This is before they were building it up in the press. For me, this was opposition research. They had something, maybe concrete evidence to all the stories I'd been hearing about, but they were probably underreported for, years, not just during the campaign. So I think I wanted to hear it out. But really, it went nowhere, and it was apparent that that wasn't what the meeting was actually about.
Do you tell your father anything about this?
No. It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff. It was literally just a wasted 20 minutes, which was a shame.
More reaction now. CNN's Jim Acosta joins us from a very quiet 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Jim, what more can you tell us about the White House response today?
Well, Anderson, there wasn't much of a response today. As you said, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the deputy press secretary, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, was not at the briefing today. Sarah Huckabee Sanders did the briefing today, and it was off camera, as you mentioned, and she only essentially had that statement, that very brief statement from the president on his son about all of this. However, we should point out there were a couple of other follow-up questions during the briefing. By and large, she tried to deflect those questions by saying, well, you have to talk to Donald Trump Jr.'s attorney about all of this. But she did say in response to one question about, there are people up on Capitol Hill talking about perjury and even using the word treason. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the use of those words would be, quote, ridiculous. But we should point out, Anderson, for the third straight day tomorrow, the president will not have any public events on his schedule. That was the case today. He was behind closed doors, did not talk in front of the cameras today. That was the case yesterday. That's also going to be the case tomorrow. The only time we're going to see the president tomorrow is when he walks in front of the cameras to get on Marine One to start heading over to Paris for his trip over to France at the end of this week, where he's supposed to hold a news conference on Thursday.
It's interesting to hear Donald Trump Jr. in that clip on Sean Hannity say that, this was a nothing, there was nothing to talk to his dad about. What is startling about in these emails, I mean, one of the many things, is that this is, as far as we know, the first time, although it doesn't sound like it's the first time that Donald Trump Jr. is hearing about it, because he sort of doesn't really seem to react to it. You have in the email someone, this guy Goldstone, saying that this information came from the Russian government, and the Russian government is backing his father. The idea that he would never have had a conversation either before this meeting, after receiving the email, or after the meeting, even though there was allegedly no there, to point out to his dad, you know what, I got this thing that's claiming the Russian government is backing you. I mean, that's kind of a bombshell in these emails, and it doesn't sound like it's the first time he's heard it, because he doesn't really react to that.
That's right, Anderson, and it raises all sorts of questions. One is, obviously, why did the president last week say that there may be other countries involved in the meddling in last year's election? I think if and when he's asked about this later on this week, he cannot say anymore, I don't think, that there might have been other countries involved in the meddling in last year's election when you have these emails going back from his own son and this music producer talking about the Russian government's support for his campaign. Now, I will tell you that I did talk to a former Trump campaign advisor earlier today, Anderson, who said, you know what, we received a lot of opposition research from all sides during the course of the campaign. And so, you have to take into consideration that some of this just may be garbage in terms of what this person was offering Donald Trump Jr. And his friend Rob Goldstone. But make no mistake, this is the president's own son, not some contact, not some associate, not some low-level staffer who went on a trip to Moscow. This is the president's own son who sat down with an attorney from Russia under the assumption that she had some kind of damaging information about Hillary Clinton. Now, earlier today, one of the questions that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked was, well, how does the president feel about this? And here's what she had to say.
I think that the president is, I would say, frustrated with the process of the fact that this continues to be an issue, and he would love for us to be focused on things like Justin mentioned, the economy, on healthcare, on tax reform, on infrastructure, and that's the place that his mind is, and that's what he'd like to be discussing.
But of course, Anderson, tonight the president cannot call any of this fake news. The news is coming from his own son, and there's just no other way to put it. It's pretty damning.
Yeah.
Anderson?
Jim Acosta, appreciate it. Thanks very much. We're also learning that details of the interactions between Trump Jr., Goldstone, and the Russian attorney were not fully known to federal investigators until recently. That's according to 3 U.S. officials familiar with the probe. Our Justice correspondent, Evan Perez, joins us now with that. So how much or how little did the special counsel know about these emails and about this meeting before the last few days? Do we know?
Well, Anderson, we don't know fully exactly what they knew, but we know that the full extent of this was not fully known, at least until very, very recently. And of course, now the special counsel Robert Mueller and the FBI agents who are doing this investigation are going to be taking a look at this. They're going to take a look at not only the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. has now disclosed, but also these email interactions to see what exactly might have happened here. Now, we don't know if this is the full extent, if this is all the emails. That's certainly something that Robert Mueller would want to know. And we also know, Anderson, that the FBI investigators have, in the past year that they've been doing this investigation, have spent some time looking at the business dealings of Donald Trump Jr. As well as some of his associations with Russians as part of the broader investigation into Russian meddling.
Right. Also, the question is, according to these emails, there's a actual phone conversation between Donald Trump Jr. And this Russian pop star whose father was this very wealthy real estate developer. Right. I talked to the attorney, and we're going to play some of that interview coming up. The attorney for the pop star and his father, who say, to his knowledge, he said two things. Either he said there was no phone call, and then he said to his knowledge there was no phone call. But the meeting with Trump Jr. and the Russian lawyer, Jared Kushner, only updated, I understand, his security clearance form recently to reflect that he was there. Is that correct? And is that the second time he's had to update his security clearance form?
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. He has now filed a second amendment to his SF-86, which is the form that he submitted to the FBI in order to get his security clearance, which he's still, working to get. He's got a temporary one at this point, Anderson. So we know that Jared Kushner's lawyers filed this amended SF-86 form in the last few weeks. We also know that Paul Manafort, however, had already disclosed the existence of this meeting. I think it was about 6 weeks ago or so, when they submitted a bunch of information, 300 pages worth of information, to Senate investigators. So Manafort had disclosed the meeting. Jared Kushner did the same thing about 3 weeks ago, Anderson, to the FBI. And so now we have this information coming out publicly. It should be also, it's also interesting to note, Anderson, that we contacted Jared Kushner's lawyers a couple of weeks ago to tell them that we were aware that they had updated the SF-86 to note the existence of this meeting that had been organized by Donald Trump Jr. We didn't hear much from them until the story appeared in the New York Times over the weekend.
Wow. So it's amazing to me that Jared Kushner has now twice had to amend his security clearance application. That's unusual.
Right, and that's going to be part of the issue here. That's part of what you see is going to be part of the focus here, because not only did you not disclose it the first time, but then the second time when you filed the information, you didn't include this meeting. Why was that?
Evan Perez, thanks very much. Good question. I spoke about some of this and more with Senator Mark Warner, who's vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Warner, this report that the details of the interactions between Donald Trump Jr. and this Russian attorney weren't fully known to the special counsel until recently. I'm wondering, was your committee aware of these emails before today or yesterday?
Anderson, I'm not going to comment about what the committee knew or didn't know and when we knew, but clearly this is a dramatic step forward in the investigation and is the first time the public has seen clear evidence that not only was there an organized Russian government effort that the Intelligence Committee has already validated to reach out and try to downgrade Clinton and help Trump, but you've also then seen senior level officials from the Trump campaign, his son-in-law, and the campaign manager welcome that kind of assistance.
So to you, these emails are critical?
It absolutely is. I mean, we've seen a series of dots. I think those dots are starting to be connected now. I think there will be more to come. But it is a grave concern to me that you've got the senior-most officials in the Trump campaign actively at least soliciting or being willing to accept at least information from a foreign government, in this case a foreign adversary, Russia, in a way that would be interference in our elections.
Does it matter whether this Russian attorney really did work for the government or not, or is the key point that Donald Trump Jr., according to these emails, seemed to believe not only that this information, whatever it was going to be, came from the Russian government, but also that she was described as a Russian government lawyer?
Well, it's interesting that not only was he excited to receive this information, and the email was explicitly clear that this was part of a Russian government effort, but it even seemed like he was trying to time the release of that information by saying it would be great if we got this late summer. And curiously enough, it was late summer when you saw much more of the DNC hacked emails come out. You started to see information that was saying that John Podesta's emails would be forthcoming. The timing was curious in terms of the request, in terms of what Mr. Trump Jr. said.
Jared Kushner, according to CNN reporting, has had to recently amend the information he gave to get his security clearance. Do you think he should have his security clearance revoked?
I'm not going to. I want to give Mr. Kushner the chance to come in and talk to our committee before I reach those kind of conclusions. But I do think it is strange to me that a meeting of this type that had been, and we don't know whether Mr. Kushner actually saw this email traffic, but if he did see this email traffic that indicated this meeting was going to be part of a campaign of the Russian government to provide information that would be helpful to Trump and hurtful to Clinton, that Mr. Kushner wouldn't remember that meeting.
Yesterday, it seemed like a lot of surrogates for the president on air elsewhere were saying, that this kind of meeting happens all the time. This is just standard operating procedure, and that Donald Trump Jr. didn't know the identity of the person that he was meeting with. Now we have these emails in which this person is described as a Russian government attorney, and that this information is coming from the Russian government. And now we're hearing from Trump surrogates, Donald Trump Jr. was naive to the ways of politics and didn't realize he shouldn't have had this meeting. Is that an excuse?
Baloney. I got to tell you, you can't call a rookie mistake not having the knowledge that if you've got an email that acknowledges that, at least on its face, says we've got information that is part of a Russian government effort to try to help his father, anyone with a lick of sense would know that you don't take that kind of help from a foreign government, and particularly a foreign adversary. I would listen, I'm going to try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but the idea that somehow that would be a rookie mistake, I find just not believable on any level.
The president today, in a statement, praised his son's transparency, was the word he used. Is that a word you would use to describe Donald Trump Jr.'s reaction to this? Because it seems like he's had a number of changes.
He has changed his story repeatedly. But again, this is a pattern that we've seen from a host of Trump officials where they deny any kind of contacts with Russians until they see proof, until proof is shown. Then they have to recant. They have to amend their filings, amend their reports. Why in the heck this administration that says there's no there there? If there's no there, why wouldn't they have come clean with all of this information to our committee when we started this investigation 6 months ago?
Senator Warner, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
Well, a lot more to talk about tonight. The panel weighs in. Also, what the lawyer for the Russian pop star and his father has to say. It's a CNN exclusive. That's next.
Support for Anderson Cooper 360 comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/AC360. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
As the Donald Trump Jr. story continues to unfold, we're continuing to seek out and talk to the principals. Late today in a CNN exclusive, I spoke with Scott Balber, the attorney for the Russian singer and his billionaire father mentioned in the emails. Did your clients, either of your clients, ever speak to Donald Trump Jr. on the phone about this meeting? Because it seems like, according to one of the June 6 emails, there was, in fact, some kind of conversation. Donald Trump Jr. tells Goldstone in the email to have your client call him on a cell phone after he gets off stage performing.
No such call occurred.
So there was never a phone conversation between Donald Trump Jr. and either of your clients?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. So not that you're aware of, or, I mean, have your clients denied that to you?
As far as I know, no such communication took place. No.
Have you asked your clients if the conversation took place?
I'm not going to tell you exactly what I spoke to my clients about, but I've been, obviously, we're getting up to speed on the issues. We're addressing the questions as they come up, and the answer is no such communication occurred.
Okay. So flat out, no such communication occurred, because you've said now no such communication occurred, and then you're not aware of it. Just no, you're saying point blank, no communication occurred.
That's right.
Well, another piece of the puzzle here with the panel: Kirsten Powers, Carl Bernstein, Matt Lewis, Ryan Liza, Steve Hall, Maggie Haberman, and Jeffrey Toobin. Ryan, I mean, it's kind of hard to overstate just the importance of this, just in terms of the progression of the story. There's still obviously a lot we don't know, and it's important to point that out.
Yeah, look, if this were something that was just simply in isolation, that none of the events that came after it, I could understand some of the defenses of it as no big deal, just meeting with someone to learn a little bit about the opponent's campaign. But it becomes a much, much bigger deal when looked at in the broader tapestry of what we've learned. Weeks later at the Republican National Convention, the traditional view of the Republican Party was changed to be more pro-Russia, right? After the election was over, the repeated attempts of Trump advisors to hide, conceal meetings with Russian officials, Donald Trump's strange defense of Michael Flynn, him firing the FBI director, repeatedly defending Putin, repeatedly going to bat for Russia, repeatedly saying that the intelligence community's assessment that Russia interfered in the election last year, at the very least casting doubt on that assessment. So all of these facts put together make this meeting particularly explosive because, that the email, even if this lawyer didn't have any information and it was just a big setup to get in there to talk about sanctions, right? The fact that these senior campaign officials eagerly sought out this person and eagerly saw an email that described the Russian government trying to help Donald Trump's campaign, and instead of saying, wait a second, this could be an issue for us to take to the FBI, which is what several campaign officials told me today they would have done. They didn't do that. They said, love it, let's set up the meeting.
I mean, Kirsten, that's what's interesting. It doesn't matter really whether this Russian lawyer has connections with the Kremlin, as the New York Times reports it does, and it doesn't matter whether she had information or whether they were disappointed with what they heard. What matters is that Donald Trump Jr. believed this was from the Russian government and believed that she was a Russian government lawyer.
Right. That's the most important thing. And I actually think, that's you're right that it does look worse with all of these other things. But honestly, if this was the only thing that had happened, the fact that there is an email that refers to the Russian government supporting the candidacy of Donald Trump, and this does not seem to be a shocking revelation to Donald Trump Jr. This is like a mid-conversation.
It's almost like a second reference, or
exactly.
This
is something he seems to have heard before. It doesn't seem remarkable to him in any way. There isn't any kind of like what or.
It's also interesting, Carl, that the attorney for the family says, look, there was no phone conversation. I mean, in the emails, Donald Trump Jr. It says that's a prerequisite for having this meeting. He wants to talk to this Russian pop star who I guess he's met before. Right. And it's all about he gives him his cell phone and he has to wait until he gets off stage.
There's real continuity to the tale. But most important, this is about the son-in-law and campaign manager of the President of the United States willingly engaging in an opportunity to subvert the interest of the United States to a foreign power, embracing it willingly and enthusiastically, according to the son of the President of the United States. The son of the President has cracked the cover-up. That is an extraordinary event. Now we'll learn more about what the cover-up was really about. And I don't mean necessarily an obstruction of justice, but we now are at the question, what did the president know about many of these events, and when did he know it?
Yeah, Matt, I mean, Donald Trump Jr. has said, and he said it again on Hannity tonight, that he did not talk to his father about this. Do you buy that? I mean, if Donald Trump Jr. is learning, whether it's for the first time or has heard it before, that the Russian government, according to this email, is backing his father, and according to this lawyer, willing to provide dirt. Is it credible that he wouldn't at some point say to his dad, you know what, the craziest thing happened today, or the craziest thing happened last week? This person says the Russian government is backing you.
Right. Well, one thing we know is that they've been prevaricating so far. So the fact that he now says, I didn't tell my dad, is meaningless as far as I'm concerned. It's possible.
Just in terms of his credibility.
Yeah. I don't think he hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt, so to speak. It's possible he didn't tell his father. That doesn't sound like their MO, though. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would protect his father. Plausible deniability. It seems like, my guess is he would have told his father. But I think
because we've heard throughout this campaign how his kids are his closest advisors. Yeah. He talks to them several times a day.
I think the other interesting thing that people keep bringing up, and I think for very good reason, is that we don't know that nothing came out of this meeting. Mm-hmm. We assume because, the Russian lawyer says nothing came out of it. Don Jr. says nothing came out of it. But he's been lying about other stuff. We don't know that nothing came out of that meeting.
Maggie Haberman, obviously, from the Times, you broke this story. Just in terms of some process, I have two questions. Donald Trump Jr. released all these emails. The president has praised him for transparency. I shouldn't say all these emails. He's released a series of emails. The president praised him for his transparency. Had the New York Times contacted him and said, we have these emails, and then he went forward with these emails? And also, Jared Kushner, my understanding is 3 weeks ago or so, he amended his security request to get a security clearance with this meeting. Can you say if he'd been informed or questioned about this meeting, or if he knew the Times was investigating?
Whether Jared Kushner knew that the Times was investigating? Well, to your first question, we had reached out to the lawyer for Donald Trump Jr., said that we were familiar with the contents of these emails and were planning to publish. We gave a hard deadline. Donald Trump Jr. preempted it. I think that there has been some frustration on the part of Donald Trump Jr. and people close to him about how the last couple of days have gone in terms of the disclosures and in terms of sort of this slow roll, drip, drip. In terms of Kushner, I forgive me, Anderson, I'm not entirely sure what you're asking me. You're asking me whether...
Yeah, our understanding is that for a second time, he has amended the information that he gave in order to get a security clearance. He did that once earlier, and then more recently he did that to include this meeting that he hadn't previously disclosed. I guess my question is, was he aware that you were investigating, and therefore that's why he amended this, or was this just a coincidence?
More broadly, without getting into specifics about our reporting and the nature of it, Jared Kushner did amend, as we understand it, amended his security clearance form, his foreign contact disclosures. I believe it was for a second time, included some reference to this meeting. Around the same time, Paul Manafort provided some more specifics to one of the congressional committees that is investigating whether there was any collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, and there was a reference to this meeting there as well. And so the emails came up at some point during both of those processes.
Jeff Toobin, does Donald Trump Jr. have any potential legal exposure here?
Potentially, but it is not at all clear that he does. Collusion, which is something we've talked a lot about, is not a crime. There is no such crime as collusion. Also, all the lies that have been told to the American people, it's not a crime to lie to the American people. One possible offense that Donald Trump Jr. might be investigated for is violating the campaign finance laws. The laws say it is unlawful to solicit anything of value from a foreign government. Now, the question is, did he solicit something of value? We don't know what went on in this meeting. I mean, I think, we have Donald Trump's word that this was a 20-minute meeting. It was a big waste of time. But presumably there are emails describing what went on at this meeting. And, this is something that is certainly going to be of interest to Director Mueller and his team in determining what he, what went on at this meeting is very important. The other person who may have a problem is Jared Kushner, because, it is that form, the application for a security clearance, is submitted under penalty of perjury. And if he only corrected it because he got caught omitting it, that is potentially a legal problem for him. So I think Jared Kushner, who's the one who has a senior job in the administration, he's the one who's at more risk, frankly, than Donald Trump Jr.
Steve Hall, a longtime CIA officer focusing on Russia. I want to ask you basically two questions. I'm not sure if you can or would answer them, but A, how likely is it that U.S. intelligence would have been aware that potentially Kremlin-linked individuals were trying to connect with the son of the presumptive Republican presidential nominee? And secondly, if there was a phone conversation between Donald Trump Jr. and this Russian pop star, is it likely or possible that somewhere was picked up and is recorded somewhere, whether either in the U.S. or overseas?
Well, taking your second question first, Anderson, yes, it's certainly possible that the intelligence community may have intercepted, and this be specifically NSA, may have intercepted such a call, although, of course, being said it would have been involving a U.S. person, there would have been, we get back to the old masking issue, was the name concealed? But that's certainly possible. I would say it's also possible that the intelligence community may have had some indication that the Russian government was attempting to arrange this meeting. But from my reading on this, I think it would have come up sooner if the intelligence community had been aware of it. But, if you sort of rewind back to when this all happened last year, I mean, what this looks very much to me like is the Russians at the time had a very successful influence operation going. They had already penetrated in a cyber fashion the DNC databases. And I think the Russian intelligence and the Russian government said, we should try for the trifecta here. Let's see if we can't make a little bit of contact with somebody in the Trump team just to see if they're willing to play ball, just to have an initial conversation. There's no doubt in my mind that the lawyer, Veselnitska, had to have been from the government, because nobody else would have had the type of information that she would have claimed, aside from somebody who had some sort of contact with the Russian government. So to me, this sounds a little bit like the Russians trying to go a little further in this operation and actually try to get a human angle to it in addition to the other stuff that they were up to.
Just very briefly, the attorney for these two Russian guys, the pop star and his father, says that the pop star was basically making this connection to Goldstone for the Russian attorney. Just she was an acquaintance of his, and he was just doing a favor because that's how things work and people do business. Does that make sense to you, or is it possible that that the father here has links to the Russian government or does business? Obviously, he's very successful in real estate there. He's got the highest civilian order of merit given by Vladimir Putin. And that would it be normal that the Russian government would use other people who are not directly linked to the government?
Sure, absolutely. This has Russian government fingerprints and intelligence all over it. I mean, a standard operating procedure for the Russian intelligence services in a situation like this is, if you are indeed reaching out to somebody, a high-level person in the Trump team, you don't want to do it with an official person. You don't want to do it with an intelligence officer or an official government person. What you want to do is you want to have a cutout. You want to have a link to a link to a link so that you have deniability. You have some sort of plausible deniability to say, sort of exactly what you're saying, Anderson. Well, maybe it was just somebody who was a friend of a friend of a friend. The Russians know that we in the West have a tendency to want to think positively about, hey, this is just business. It's just another meeting. Who knows what was going to happen? And yet, this is exactly how the Russians, especially the intelligence services, operate.
I want to thank everybody. When we come back, we're going to hear from political operatives about how they see the latest revelations about the Trump campaign meeting and what that means for the future of this administration.
Heyo, Trey Kirby here, 1/4 of the starters, the biggest and best fourth, but at least that's my opinion. The rest is up to you. Don't forget to download our podcast, The Drop, every Friday wherever you get your podcasts, or find us at nba.com/thestarters.
After Donald Trump Jr. tweeted his Russia meeting emails this morning, igniting a firestorm of critique from both sides of the aisle, White House spokesman Sarah Huckabee Sanders stayed mum in an off-camera press briefing. Listen.
Can you stand by a statement you made yesterday when you said that our position is that no one within the Trump campaign colluded in order to influence the election?
I do, and again, I don't have, beyond the statements yesterday and what I read today, I don't have anything else to add. And I know you guys are going to get tired of it today, and not to sound like a broken record, but on all questions related to this matter, I would refer you to Don Jr.'s counsel and the outside counsel. To repeat myself, I'm going to refer you to the outside counsel, and I don't have anything else to add. Look, the president gave a statement on the matter, which I read to you, and like I've said, I don't have anything else to add beyond that. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of anything surrounding this, and would refer you to Don Jr.'s counsel.
Is the president now aware of the Russian government effort to influence the campaign in his favor?
Again, I'm not going to answer any questions on that matter.
Well, there's also a bit of late news from Capitol Hill. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley is asking the Department of Homeland Security and State Department to look into how the Russian attorney who met with Donald Trump Jr. was allowed to enter the country. Bringing in a new panel now, former Republican Congresswoman from New York, Nan Hayworth, Paul Begala, Jeffrey Lord, and Robbie Mook. Paul, two things we've heard from Trump surrogates over the last couple of days is that this is just standard operating procedure. Every campaign looks for opposition research, nothing to see here. And that what we've heard more now since these emails is that, well, Donald Trump Jr. was politically naive and just, made a mistake or something he shouldn't have done.
Right. If that's their story, they should stick to it. It's not going to hold. Trump Jr. was the son of they presumed at that moment, Republican nominee. In that meeting also was Paul Manafort. Decades of experience, including experience with Russians. When you get an email, you don't have to have a lot of experience. When an email that says, I want to make sure I get the words right, that Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, when the Russian government is an adversary of the United States, had always been in the eyes of Republicans. In fact, the previous Republican nominee, Mitt Romney, was ridiculed by me and others wrongly for saying Russia was our chief geostrategic adversary. Right? At the time, I was more upset about ISIS. ISIS is now largely knocked back, thanks Obama. But it's just not going to hold. You can't. But by the way, the notion that every campaign does it, I've been in touch over Twitter publicly with Matthew Dowd, who ran Bush's campaign, Stuart Spencer, who ran Romney's campaign, David Axelrod, who ran Obama's campaign. None of us have ever heard of anything like this. I base this on 34 years of experience in campaigns.
Congresswoman
Never
Hayworth, when you were running,
like
if you had gotten email from an intermediary saying the Russian government is backing you and there's a Russian government attorney who'd like to meet with you to give you dirt on your opponent, would you have had that meeting?
I would have been absolutely shocked because I was just running for Congress, frankly, Anderson. But no, you know what?
But would you have had that meeting?
No, look, politics.
Would you have had
shock,
that meeting?
Well, it would shock no one. Especially you, Paul, I'm sure, to know. No, you, Anderson, you're a sophisticated man. Politics is a tough and dirty business.
You might have sat down with somebody who said they were from the Russian government.
I do not fault Donald Trump Jr. for at his stage.
Right. With all due respect, though, you haven't answered the question.
It's a very high stakes political campaign. I do not fault him for doing that. And this is a nothing pickle on, to use Van Jones's famous term, a nothing.
I just want to give you one more opportunity to say, would you have personally sat down with somebody?
Donald Trump Jr. did nothing
but you're embarrassed
wrong.
To say
no, there is.
Can I give you a contrast from reality?
Politics is full of all kinds of interesting
so you would have sat
situations.
Down with a Russian government official.
If somebody said to anybody in politics, I have information that might be of interest, I don't fault anybody for sitting down and hearing the information.
I do.
In this case,
in
there
fact,
was nothing.
Here's a counterexample. Al Gore's running against George W. Bush. They're tied in the polls. They're going into the debates. Tom Downey, congressman from New York, big Gore pal, was going to play Bush in the debate, perhaps. He receives, unsolicited, just opens a mailbox one day, and there's the Bush debate briefing book. Somebody in the Bush campaign betrayed their boss, shipped it to Tom Downey. You know what Tom did? He called the FBI right away.
Well, good for him.
Then he called Don Evans, the Bush campaign chairman, and said, hey, you have a traitor in your midst. Then he recused himself from the debate, and I had to play. That's what an honorable person does, and Donald Trump Jr. is not an honorable person.
So how come Donna Brazil didn't project
We're not talking about Donna Brazil. We're talking about Russia hacking the election.
What's
happening to Donna Brazil? She's been let.
But at the time, she accepted it. At the time,
what she did was,
and she accepted the information.
But let me just point out, what she did was incredibly
that
sleazy.
She was supporting.
Right, that was incredibly sleazy. You were refusing to characterize anything about Donald Trump Jr.
I'm saying that Donald Trump Jr. did nothing with that information.
Robbie, would you, if a Russian, if somebody Russian said they were from the Russian government and were sending a Russian government attorney, is that business as usual?
No, it's not business as usual at all. Look, there's a lot of people who come up to campaigns with information. For example, when I was running Hillary's campaign, we had a lot of Donald Trump's former employees come to us, talk about how they didn't get paid, contractors who he didn't reply to their invoices, and we talked to them. But guess what? They were American citizens, and they were legitimately engaging in a debate about a candidate for office. If someone claiming to represent the Russian government had reached out and said, first of all, we're supporting your candidate, and second of all, we dug up some oppo to give to you, I'd be petrified that I'd be in trouble. I mean, that's what's so crazy about this. And then you layer on top of that how Don Jr., look, he went on TV and called me disgusting for saying that the Russians were involved in the election at all, let alone meeting with him. They've lied so much, they have no credibility on this. The other thing that's troubling to me, I actually disagree a little bit with one of your experts earlier. I think this thing has been it was so bold. It was in such plain sight the whole time. We don't put the pieces together. This wasn't the Russians taking another little step. They've been working on this for a long time. You look at Carter Page, who was Donald Trump's foreign policy advisor. The Russians were talking about the man 1 or 2 years earlier about potentially bringing him on as a spy. They were working on this for a long time, and they were coming at it from every angle. Paul mentioned Paul Manafort, long time working for Russian affiliates. So they were coming from all angles on this. And I think we have been too small, and we've analyzed every little part. We've never pulled back and frankly noticed how big and how bold this really was.
Jeffrey Lohr, when President Trump praises his son's transparency, I mean, do you believe that what Donald Trump Jr. has done over the last couple of days is being fully transparent? Because it does seem like he released the email chain once he knew the New York Times was prepared to publish, and his initial story was not what it is now. Okay,
unequivocally, I know Don Trump Jr. Unequivocally. I want to go.
How is it transparent? How is it transparent? How is it transparent to say initially, "Oh, this was a meeting about orphans," and then
did he not release his email chain? Anderson,
once the New York Times was about to.
Anderson, talking about transparency. I just posted an article at the American Spectator. In doing my research, I came across an interview with Dick Morris at Newsmax in September of 2016, in which he says that President Clinton personally, in 1996, meddled and colluded, if you will, in the Russian election to elect Boris Yeltsin. Now, one of the major backers of Yeltsin's opponents was
you're going by Dick Morris.
Vladimir Putin.
Dick Morris is your source on this?
Decades later, we find a situation where Bill Clinton's wife is the Democratic nominee for president. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Right. Dick Morris was the guy who, didn't he pour champagne into a person's shoe and then he got booted from the campaign? I mean, is he the best source on this?
Well, look, this is Dick Morris saying that let's President Clinton get out there and testify.
I got to jump in here, Anderson. I got to jump in here.
Let's get them all out. Bring on Donald Trump. Investigate.
Robbie, go ahead.
What we're saying is it's okay for foreign powers to interject in our elections and back a certain candidate because a president took a foreign policy position. Because I'm actually going to add on to this. It was Hillary Clinton.
You're saying it's okay for an American president, Robbie, to intervene?
It was Hillary Clinton. It was Hillary Clinton who called out Vladimir Putin for rigging his election in Russia. It was Hillary Clinton who called out Vladimir Putin for human rights abuses.
Wait a minute.
And so we're saying that then if Putin chooses to get involved in our election, that's okay. That's crazy.
Well, why is it okay?
You can't condone this kind of thing.
It was Hillary Clinton who signed off on 20% of our nation's uranium supply being sold to a Russian majority-owned company.
Congresswoman, that's false.
That to me,
that's just been false. It's just not true. You might like to peddle fake news. That is not true.
It is true, and that's a real national security issue.
To paraphrase Kellyanne Conway, it's nice to take a trip down memory lane, but can we refocus on actually what's happening today?
Relevant.
First, I read Jeffrey's column, and what he alleges my old boss did was phone up Yeltsin and say, you should run ads on this. Because he's a kibitzer. The Russians they attacked John McCain. Excuse me, Jeffrey, I'll let you talk. You got to let me. The Russians hacked our country. John McCain, a war hero, called it an act of war. We have to retaliate. We need to join together. What Donald Trump is doing is trying to divide us, and he is siding with the enemy, with Russia. The Russians came to his son and to his son-in-law and to his campaign chairman and said, we have dirt on your opponent. And they said, great.
We got to
call the FBI.
So let's investigate. We got the investigation is certainly ongoing. We got to take a break. Another perspective, Eric Trump's theory is that some people just can't stand that the Trump family is extremely close and always support each other. We'll talk about that, Trump family values, with two Trump biographers next.
My name is Scott Jordan. My problem? I had tons of stuff to carry, but no easy way to do it, so I started Scotty Vest. At Scotty Vest, we make great-looking clothing with tons of hidden pockets and unique features. Now you can carry all your stuff hands-free while looking great. Never worry about misplacing anything ever again. Scotty Vest will change your life.
Visit Scotty Vest and for a limited time enter promo code CNN for an extra 20% off. That's scottevest.com/CNN.
Donald Trump Jr. released his emails on Twitter. There's been a lot of response on Twitter, including from the British politician who led the Brexit movement, Nigel Farage, tweeted, quote, Donald Trump Jr. is the best public supporter at POTUS in the business. No surprise he's under attack. Also this from Eric Trump. This is the exact reason they viciously attack our family. They can't stand that we are extremely close and will always support each other. Joining us now, two men who wrote books on Donald Trump, Michael D'Antonio and Timothy O'Brien. Michael, the president's initial statement today said that my son is a high-quality person, and I applaud his transparency. Were you surprised by that at all?
Well, I was surprised that it was such a mild endorsement of his son. He said the same kind of things about Michael Flynn before he was out. And I think just saying he's a high-quality person is almost throwing him under the bus. I would have defended my own son far more vigorously. And the idea that he's transparent, to me, that was an attaboy. It's like, you did the right thing. I think this was something he was directed to do. And
Tim, the White House has said now the president knew nothing about this until recently. I mean, in this email chain, Donald Trump Jr. is being told that the Russian government is backing his father. There was no reaction really in the email chain to that part of it?
He's also told in the email chain by Rob Goldstone, should we tell your father about this? I can contact Rona. Rona Graff, who is Donald Trump's longtime gatekeeper.
There have been articles about how if you really want to get to Donald Trump, Rona Graff is sort of the way to do it.
Right, and so those emails have now exposed Rona Graff's server and her calendar probably to subpoena requests from Robert Mueller. But beyond that, it also raises this question of when did the president know about the meeting? And is Donald Trump Jr. telling the truth today when he says he never knew? And I think there's good reason to believe that Donald Trump Jr. may not be being candid today about that fact.
I mean, one of the things Eric Trump's saying that they're such a close family and they'll support each other, always. Is it possible that Donald Trump Jr. would not have told his father that he has learned or been told that Russia is backing his campaign, whether it was before this meeting or after this meeting?
I think it's highly unlikely. I'm 95% certain that this is a meeting that Donald Trump, now the president, understood was going to take place. I'm sure he was told what happened afterwards. This is a man whose stock and trade is information. He loves to gossip. He loves to know exactly what's going on everywhere. And, one of the things that Donald Jr. told me was that if you get 100 things right but one thing wrong, you're going to hear about it for the rest of your life from Donald Trump. And I think that he's very much aware of pleasing his dad. And back then, there wouldn't have been any boundaries. This would have been very porous, and I can't imagine he didn't inform his father right away.
Tim, this was also during a time that it's important to remember the context of all this, where there was a power struggle within the campaign between sort of Corey Lewandowski and Paul Manafort. And, according to all the reporting at the time, the Trump kids had kind of turned from Lewandowski toward Manafort.
And that, in fact, Donald Trump Jr. played a leading role in pushing Lewandowski out. And all of this will get back probably to questions about who has been the source of some of the information that's gone to the New York Times through the great reporting they've been doing over the last few days.
Right, because they cite three, if I'm getting it correctly, if memory serves me correctly, in one of their reports, three people who advised the White House. So it's not as if this is coming
from law enforcement, which a lot of the major leaks have so far. And the Times was very clear in its reporting to say they clearly had White House sources. It's another example of how divided and porous this administration is, and it's a reflection of how divided and porous the Trump campaign was.
Why would somebody in the White House or connections to the White House, who supposedly supports the president, leak stuff about Donald Trump Jr.?
Because it's the Keystone Cops. This isn't a team that's running as a disciplined, goal-oriented unit. It's Trump's never run anything that way in his whole life, and he's certainly not running the White House that way. And I think they easily turn on one another.
I think what Tim just said about the president having never operated anything in an orderly and deliberate fashion is absolutely true. The thing that mattered in the past was that the buck stopped with Donald Trump, and it was a matter of his celebrity and his profit. And I think now that...
And you had to make the boss look good.
Yeah, make him look good. And I think now that he's the president of the United States, there's a problem with not focusing on the business of the United States of America. What they're still focused on is promoting Donald Trump's image. And everyone's fighting for favored status within the administration.
And they're actually fighting a media war right now when they should be thinking about the legal battles they're facing. They're positioning themselves vis-a-vis the press, both Donald Trump Jr. and his father, and they're not thinking strategically about the legal consequences that they're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that Donald Trump Jr. gave an interview tonight to Sean Hannity, obviously a friendly outlet, but...
had to drive his lawyers nuts.
Yeah, Michael D'Antonio, Tim O'Brien, appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
more on today's big developments. We'll dig into who's lawyering up and why ahead.